20 black actors who were constantly mocked for their acting, but still became stars. One of them was told acting like him was like watching a statue try to remember its lines. Another was mocked so hard for a single sci-fi flop that the internet turned him into a permanent meme. A third was dismissed as an American Idol reject who'd never survive beside real stars, then walked away with an Oscar. Before the billions and the gold statues, these 20 black legends were Hollywood's favorite punchlines, laughed out of rooms and written off as talentless. But every one of them turned that ridicule into rocket fuel. Stay to the end, because the biggest glow-up will leave you speechless. And subscribe to Secret Celebrity Stories, where every punchline hides a comeback. Ice Cube. Ice Cube, O'Shea Jackson, had to fight mockery on two completely different fronts to become the mogul he is today. When he first walked away from NWA to act in John Singleton's Boys in the Hood in 1991, the serious acting world laughed at the idea that a gangster rapper could carry a film. They mocked his permanently furrowed brow, dismissing him as a one-note performer who could only play a version of his street persona. Then, when he pivoted to comedy with Friday, and later to family films like Are We There Yet?, an even louder wave of ridicule arrived. Hip-hop purists called him a sellout, and film snobs mocked the sight of the man who wrote the fiercest protest anthems of his era, getting outsmarted by kids in a minivan. But Cube was never just acting. He was studying the entire game. He understood that real power in Hollywood meant owning the family audience and the production rights, not chasing critical approval. That once-mocked scowl became a trademark, the perfect comedic straight man foil. And through his company Cube Vision, he built a producing empire whose films have grossed well over $1 billion. His vision behind Straight Outta Compton turned into a roughly $200 million global hit and earned an Academy Award nomination for Best Original Screenplay. The critics who sneered at his softening completely missed the strategy. He wasn't losing his edge. He was sharpening it to cut straight through the boardroom doors. Ice Cube proved that a true pioneer can conquer any genre he chooses, and that the people laughing loudest are often the ones who understand the game the least. Queen Latifah. Queen Latifah, Dana Owens, is one of the most versatile forces in all of entertainment, but her leap from pioneering queen of rap to Hollywood leading lady was met with a wall of quiet doubt. In the early 1990s, the film industry clung to a narrow, cookie-cutter definition of what a female star was allowed to look like. When Latifah began turning heads in films like Set It Off, critics were quick to mock the very notion of a rapper-turned-actress, suggesting she was too tough, too unconventional, and destined to be stuck forever in sassy best friend roles. It was gatekeeping dressed up as film criticism, questioning whether a woman with her stature could ever anchor a romantic lead. Latifah answered, not with anger, but with sheer, undeniable craft. The turning point came in 2002, when she was cast as the sly, show-stopping matron Mama Morton in the film adaptation of Chicago. The critics who had mocked her limitations fell silent, as she delivered a performance both commanding and vocally dazzling, earning an Academy Award nomination for Best Supporting Actress, and making her one of the very few hip-hop artists ever recognized by the Academy. She proved that her look wasn't a liability at all. It was a timeless, regal presence that resonated with millions of women who had never seen themselves centered on screen. Today, with an estimated net worth around $70 million and her production company Flavor Unit behind hits like The Equalizer, she became the first hip-hop artist to earn a star on the Hollywood Walk of Fame. Queen Latifah didn't change herself to fit Hollywood. She forced Hollywood to expand its entire definition of a queen. Kevin Hart. Kevin Hart is a global titan of entertainment now, but his journey began buried under relentless skepticism, most of it aimed squarely at his 5'4" frame and his high-pitched, frenetic energy. When he first emerged from the Philadelphia comedy scene, he wasn't welcomed, he was heckled. Critics dismissed him early on as a one-trick pony, a loud-mouthed sidekick who leaned on slapstick because he supposedly lacked any real wit. When he starred in films like Soul Plane, reviewers were brutal, calling his performance annoying and predicting he'd be a forgotten footnote, a budget Chris Tucker who could never lead a franchise. But Kevin's business mind moved even faster than his punchlines. While the critics fixated on his height, he was quietly building a direct digital bridge to his fans, becoming one of the very first comedians to weaponize social media as a tool of mass distribution. By the time the film industry realized he was a genuine star, he was already selling out entire football stadiums, a feat achieved by only a handful of legends. In 2011, his stand-up film, Laugh at My Pain, turned a tiny budget of roughly $750,000 into around $7.7 million at the box office, silencing everyone who said he couldn't sell tickets. Today, Kevin Hart is a mogul with an estimated net worth near $450 million, producing through his company Heartbeat, having starred in more than 50 films, whose combined gross tops $4 billion. The mockery of his stature and his style became the very foundation of his everyman appeal. While the critics studied his height, Kevin was staring straight at the horizon, and he built an entire ecosystem with himself at the center. Tyler Perry. Few rises in Hollywood history have been paved with as much mockery, or as much vindication, as Tyler Perry's. In the early 2000s, he was the favorite punching bag of highbrow critics, who ridiculed his signature character, the pistol-packing grandmother Medea, as a regressive caricature, and dismissed his directing as amateurish. But while the ivory tower sneered, Perry was quietly rewriting the entire business model of entertainment, serving a massive audience that Hollywood had ignored for decades. Every time a critic mocked his low-budget aesthetic, his fans answered by shattering box office records. His first film, Diary of a Mad Black Woman, was predicted to flop. Instead, it opened at #1 with a startling $21.9 million debut. He had proven you don't need the approval of critics if you have the hearts of the people, and his ascent never stopped. Today, Tyler Perry is the first African American to independently own a major film studio, a 330-acre complex on a former military base in Atlanta, one of the largest in the United States, and the largest owned outright by a single person, complete with a full-scale replica of the White House. Netflix and Marvel Productions now rent his sound stages, contributing well over $100 million a year. Having produced more than 1,200 television episodes and over 20 films, all while keeping full ownership, Perry reached an estimated net worth of $1.4 billion, one of the wealthiest entertainers alive. The same executives who once refused to return his calls now study his model as the gold standard. He didn't just ignore the mockery, he used its revenue to build his own kingdom. 50 Cent. Curtis Jackson, 50 Cent, stands today as a towering figure of reinvention, but his move from the king of gangster rap to Hollywood heavyweight was met with pure derision. When he first appeared on screen in the 2005 semi-autobiographical Get Rich or Die Tryin', critics didn't merely pan the film. They attacked his very presence, mocking his stiff delivery, with one famously comparing watching him act to watching a statue try to remember its lines. For years, the industry dismissed him as a musician, playing a caricature of himself, a man whose range supposedly began and ended with a scowl. What those executives vastly underestimated was his grit. He didn't sit around waiting for better scripts. He decided to own the ink they were written with. The ridicule peaked around his startling physical transformation for the 2011 film All Things Fall Apart, when he dropped nearly 54 pounds in 9 weeks to play a cancer patient. But while critics fixated on the look, he was quietly absorbing the mechanics of production. The real silence fell on his doubters when he launched the Power universe on Starz. As both executive producer and the coldly menacing Kanan Stark, he proved that his stiff demeanor was actually a calculated, magnetic screen presence. Power became one of the network's highest-rated shows, at one point accounting for nearly 40% of its viewership, and he parlayed that into a massive multi-series deal estimated at around $150 million. The man once mocked as unwatchable is now the architect of a television empire that has birthed multiple spin-offs and redefined the modern crime drama. 50 Cent didn't just learn to act. He learned to dictate the culture itself. Martin Lawrence. Martin Lawrence belongs on the Mount Rushmore of comedy, but his road to that status was lined with the sneers of elite critics. In the 1990s, As his sitcom Martin became a cultural phenomenon for Black America, mainstream reviewers were brutal, mocking his lowest common denominator humor and calling his character-driven slapstick, where he'd often play multiple roles in drag and prosthetics, annoying and regressive. One infamous review dismissed his whole style as exhausting, painting him as a loud mimic with no real substance. The ridicule only intensified during his public struggles in the late 90s, when entertainment writers were quick to suggest his career was effectively finished. But Martin possessed a connection to everyday audiences that no critic could sever or even understand. He knew his fans weren't after sophisticated satire. They wanted the relatable, high-energy joy that only he could deliver. He channeled all that mockery into a massive film career, proving his box office muscle with Bad Boys, a franchise critics predicted would fail. Instead, the first film grossed over $141 million and launched a series that has now earned well past $1 billion worldwide, powered by his chemistry with Will Smith. Today, Martin Lawrence is a mogul with an estimated net worth around $110 million, and his sitcom, Martin, remains one of the most watched shows in syndication, its appeal utterly timeless. The man once dismissed as a loud mimic is now celebrated as an architectural genius of the sitcom format, and his recent return in Bad Boys: Ride or Die dominated the box office, proving audiences still crave exactly the energy he was mocked for. He didn't win over the critics, he simply outran them, one unforgettable catchphrase at a time. Shaquille O'Neal. Shaquille O'Neal is a global brand worth hundreds of millions today. But his first venture into entertainment was, for a time, the laughingstock of the industry. In the mid-1990s, when Shaq tried his hand at acting and rapping, the mockery was relentless. Critics savaged his lead roles in Kazam and Steel, labeling them among the worst misfires of the decade, and painted him as a clumsy giant who should simply stick to the basketball court. The Razzie nominations and the cruel jokes of that pre-viral era framed him as a cautionary tale of athlete vanity. But Shaq's business IQ turned out to be as massive as his 7'1" frame. He understood something his critics never grasped. He wasn't just an actor, he was a personality. Rather than run from the bad movies, he leaned into the mockery, using self-deprecating humor to transform himself from a failed leading man into one of the most beloved pitchmen in television history. He turned his image into a masterclass of gentle giant charisma, and by the time he retired from the NBA, he had already built a diversified empire most serious actors would envy. Today, Shaq's financial legacy is staggering, with an estimated net worth around $500 million, and he owns stakes in dozens of companies, from scores of Five Guys locations to fitness centers. While his commercials for major brands generate enormous revenue, he proved that the mockery of his early acting was just a stepping stone to becoming one of the most recognizable faces in American marketing. Shaq had the last laugh, showing that you don't need an Oscar to be a legend, just the vision to turn a giant mistake into a giant empire. Jennifer Hudson. Jennifer Hudson's story is one of the most dramatic comeback arcs in all of entertainment. In 2004, when she was eliminated in 7th place on American Idol, many assumed her career was finished before it had even started. So when she was cast as Effie White in Dreamgirls, the mockery was intense. Skeptics openly wondered how a reality show loser could possibly hold her own beside superstars like Beyoncé and Eddie Murphy, and Hollywood whispers insisted her acting would be swallowed by her enormous voice. Instead, she channeled every ounce of that rejection into a performance so raw, it left audiences breathless. Her rendition of "And I Am Telling You I'm Not Going" became a cultural earthquake, but it was her subtle, heartbreaking dramatic work that truly stunned the cynics. When the 79th Academy Awards arrived, the young woman told she wasn't star material walked away with the Oscar for Best Supporting Actress, a definitive rebuke to everyone who had laughed, and she never settled for being a one-hit wonder. She weathered the mockery of the disastrous Cats film with professional grace, and then reclaimed her throne by portraying Aretha Franklin in Respect, a role the Queen of Soul had personally handpicked her for. In 2022, she officially achieved EGOT status, Emmy, Grammy, Oscar, and Tony, a feat accomplished by only a small handful of people in history. With a successful daytime talk show and an estimated net worth above $30 million, Jennifer Hudson has proven that being underestimated was simply the fuel she needed to become a legend. She didn't just find her voice. She forced the entire world to stop and listen. Monique. Monique's journey is one of the most profound "I told you so" moments in Hollywood history. Through the late 1990s and early 2000s, she was the target of a very specific, biting mockery. Because she specialized in in-your-face stand-up and starred in the broad sitcom The Parkers, critics dismissed her as crude, too loud, and unpolished. A lowbrow entertainer, they claimed, who lacked the sophistication to be taken seriously as a dramatic actress. The laughter turned to stunned silence in 2009, when director Lee Daniels cast her as the monstrous, abusive mother Mary Jones in Precious. The industry braced to mock a comedian they assumed was out of her depth. Instead, Monique delivered a performance so terrifyingly authentic and emotionally devastating that it is still cited among the greatest in film history. The woman, once ridiculed for being too much, swept awards season, winning more than 30 honors and culminating in the Academy Award for Best Supporting Actress. A monumental rebuke to every critic who had called her a one-trick act. In the years since, she has remained a fearless advocate for herself, openly speaking about a long period in which she felt blackballed for refusing to play the industry's games. And she has proven her draw is undimmed, making a triumphant return with a major, widely praised Netflix stand-up special. With an estimated net worth around $13 million and a legacy built on raw truth, she has shown that the mockery of her unrefined nature was actually her single greatest strength. Monique reminds every viewer that you don't need to change your voice to win. You just have to make it impossible to ignore. Marlon Wayans. Marlon Wayans is finally receiving the respect he was denied for over 3 decades. For much of his career, he was dismissed as the silly one in the legendary Wayans dynasty because he specialized in broad parody, most famously in the Scary Movie and White Chicks franchises. Critics were quick to brand him a lowbrow performer, mocking his over-the-top humor and suggesting he lacked the depth for real acting. At the height of the parody era, some reviewers even accused him of squandering his family's legacy on mindless slapstick. Then, in the year 2000, the world was forced to swallow its words. When director Darren Aronofsky cast him in the harrowing drama Requiem for a Dream, Marlon's portrayal of Tyrone, a man spiraling into the abyss of addiction, was nothing short of a revelation, a haunting, stripped-back performance that proved he could stand shoulder to shoulder with the most intense dramatic actors of his generation. Yet even after that acclaim, Hollywood kept trying to shove him back into the funny box, mocking his return to spoof films. Marlon stayed unfazed, understanding that making millions of people laugh is every bit as difficult as making them cry. He seized control of his own narrative by becoming a writer and producer, ensuring he'd never again be at the mercy of a casting director's limited imagination. And his deeply personal recent stand-up work reveals a master blending high-concept comedy with genuine vulnerability. With a career box office total exceeding $1 billion, Marlon Wayans has proven he was never just a clown. He's a multifaceted artist who used the world's laughter as a shield while quietly perfecting his craft. At last, he's the one getting the final laugh. Cuba Gooding Jr. Cuba Gooding Jr. remains one of the most enigmatic talents in film history. His career a roller coaster of dazzling triumph and brutal public roasting. After his electrifying Oscar-winning turn in Jerry Maguire in 1997, the world expected him to become the next great dramatic leading man. Instead, a string of broad comedy choices turned him into a target for mockery, with critics branding him an Oscar winner who'd traded prestige for a paycheck, and the internet flooding with jokes that he should hand the statue back. For over a decade, he was written off as a has-been who had lost his dramatic compass. But what critics called failure, Cuba understood as longevity. While the world mocked his straight-to-video era, he was quietly maintaining a relentless work ethic, appearing in dozens of projects and never losing the fire that had made him a star. He grasped a truth about Hollywood that his doubters didn't. You are only ever one great role away from a total reset. That moment arrived in 2016 with The People vs. O.J. Simpson, American crime story. His portrayal of the embattled football star was a genuine tour de force, earning him an Emmy nomination and reminding the world exactly why that gold statue sat on his shelf. The show became a massive critical hit, averaging over 7 million viewers an episode. Today, with a career spanning nearly 4 decades, Cuba has proven that a punchline can always become a powerhouse again. He carries the scars of public mockery with a knowing smile, showing that true talent doesn't evaporate. It simply waits for the right season to bloom. He didn't just survive the jokes, he outlasted every single one of them. Ludacris. Ludacris, Chris Bridges, is now a cornerstone of a multi-billion-dollar cinematic universe. But his transition from the king of Southern rap to a respected actor was first met with eye rolls and open skepticism. In the early 2000s, when he was cast in Too Fast, Too Furious, many critics dismissed it as stunt casting, a cynical way to sell tickets to hip-hop fans using a rapper they assumed couldn't act. They mocked his larger-than-life music video persona as far too cartoonish for the nuanced world of cinema, with one harsh review predicting he'd never be more than a famous face filling space in action flicks. The turning point came in 2004 with Crash. Ludacris delivered a performance so grounded and layered that it left the snobs speechless. His portrayal of a carjacker with surprisingly complex social theories became a highlight of a film that won the Academy Award for Best Picture. He didn't just show up. He held his own alongside seasoned veterans, proving his timing wasn't only for rhythmic bars, but for the subtle emotional beats that high-stakes drama demands. Today, Ludacris is one of the most bankable stars around. As Tej Parker in the Fast and Furious franchise, he's been vital to a series that has grossed over $7 billion worldwide. And beyond acting, he's an entrepreneur with an estimated net worth near $40 million. He transformed from a rapper hired for clout into a respected actor and producer who commands millions per role. Ludacris proved that the mockery of his origins was simply a failure of imagination on his critics' part, and that a true artist can master any medium he touches. Terrence Howard. Terrence Howard is an actor of singular, almost hypnotic intensity, yet his path to becoming a television titan was often clouded by mockery of his eccentric style. In the early 2000s, even as his talent drew praise, critics ridiculed his mannerisms, particularly his soft, whispering voice and theatrical choices, suggesting he was trying too hard to be deep, his performances artificial. The mockery intensified around his high-profile departure from the Iron Man franchise, when he was replaced in the role, and some writers cruelly suggested his reputation and his unconventional personal theories would simply end his career. But Terrence turned that very eccentricity into one of the most compelling characters on modern television. He understood that to play a king, you need a presence that feels slightly off-world. When he landed the role of the ruthless music mogul Lucius Lyon in Empire, the industry braced for another over-the-top performance, and instead got a masterclass in calculated menace. His whispering voice became a weapon of intimidation, and his intensity helped drive the show into a full cultural phenomenon, at its peak, averaging over 17 million viewers a week. He proved his unusual approach wasn't a lack of skill, but a specific, high-level craft that no one else could replicate. Today, Terrence Howard remains a respected, if unconventional figure, with an estimated net worth around $5 million, and though he has spoken about stepping back from acting to focus on his own scientific pursuits, his legacy as a dramatic powerhouse is secure. He never conformed to the standard leading man mold. He broke it and built something entirely his own, reminding us that in art, being different isn't a weakness, it's a superpower. Tracy Morgan. Tracy Morgan is a beloved icon of comedy today, but for decades he was the target of a specific and painful kind of ridicule. During his early years on Saturday Night Live, critics were relentless, mocking his cartoonish characters and calling him the weakest link in the cast. Many suggested he wasn't smart enough for sophisticated satire, framing his off-the-wall energy as unprofessionalism rather than genius. For a long time, the ridicule centered on the idea that Tracy was a novelty act, someone who got lucky for being weird, rather than someone with real comedic brilliance. The turning point that silenced the skeptics was his role as Tracy Jordan on 30 Rock. By playing a heightened, satirical version of his own public persona, he proved he'd been in on the joke all along, revealing a level of self-awareness and comedic timing that few actors possess, and earning Emmy nominations from the very writers who'd once looked down on him. Then, after a near-fatal traffic accident in 2014 that he fought through a long recovery to survive, the mockery transformed into a global outpouring of love, revealing just how cherished he had become. Today, Tracy Morgan is a survivor, with an estimated net worth around $70 million, having grown from a sketch comedy sidekick into a leading man with grounded, soulful work on series like The Last OG. He proved that what looked like instability was really just authenticity the industry hadn't learned to appreciate. He didn't polish himself for Hollywood. He made Hollywood embrace his raw, unfiltered truth, reminding all of us that no matter how often the world casts you as a punchline, you hold the power to write your own ending. Anthony Anderson. Anthony Anderson is the gold standard for the Hollywood glow-up, but for nearly 2 decades he was trapped in a cycle of mockery that would have discouraged almost anyone else. In the early 2000s, he was the industry's go-to funny big guy, constantly ridiculed by critics for playing the loud, clumsy sidekick in films like Barbershop. Reviewers mocked his physical comedy as lowbrow and stereotypical, dismissing him as a paycheck actor who'd take any role regardless of quality, and the running assumption was that he simply lacked the gravitas or the dramatic depth to ever be taken seriously as an artist. His transformation began when he decided to take control of both his physical health and his professional story. He didn't just lose weight, he shed the sidekick energy the industry had forced on him for years. The turning point came with Blackish, a show he not only starred in, but also executive produced. The same critics who had mocked his slapstick were forced to acknowledge a master of nuanced, socially conscious comedy, as the series became a cultural cornerstone and earned him 7 consecutive Emmy nominations for Outstanding Lead Actor in a Comedy Series. He proved he could carry a major network show with every bit as much weight and intelligence as any A-list dramatic star. Today, Anthony Anderson is a household name with an estimated net worth around $25 million, having gone from the guy who was laughed at to the man chosen to host the 75th Primetime Emmy Awards. He didn't merely change his image. He changed the way Hollywood sees the funny man, proving that with enough discipline and self-belief, the sidekick can eventually become the king of the hill. Tiffany Haddish. Tiffany Haddish is a firecracker of talent, but her path to the A-list was a gauntlet of rejection and public ridicule. For years, she was the girl from South Central that industry insiders looked down on, with critics and casting directors mocking her unrefined energy as too loud and too much for mainstream consumption. During a long stretch of homelessness, living out of her car while grinding through the comedy circuit, she was often the target of cruel jokes from peers who dismissed her as a bottom-tier comic, trading on struggle rather than craft. Even after her breakout, some writers insisted she was one note and would quickly burn out. The world finally stopped laughing at her and started laughing with her in 2017, with the release of Girls Trip. Her performance as the gloriously unfiltered Dina was so transcendent that it didn't just fuel the film toward roughly $155 million globally, it earned genuine critical acclaim. The woman once mocked as too unpolished became the first black female stand-up comedian to host Saturday Night Live, a historic milestone that won her an Emmy. She proved her loudness was never a lack of discipline. It was a radical authenticity that a tired industry desperately needed. Today, Tiffany is a mogul in the making, with an estimated net worth around $18 million, having transformed her hard upbringing in foster care into a foundation for philanthropy through her She Ready Foundation, with a best-selling memoir and a growing slate of producer credits to her name. She didn't tone herself down for the red carpet. She made the red carpet wait for her, proving that being too much is sometimes exactly enough to change the world. Tyrese Gibson. Tyrese Gibson is a cornerstone of one of the highest-grossing film franchises in history, but his journey from R&B crooner to action hero was paved with pretty boy jokes and professional disrespect. When he first crossed over from music into Baby Boy and Too Fast, Too Furious, critics were brutal, mocking his acting as limited and suggesting he'd been hired purely for his looks. Reviewers dismissed his performances as glorified music videos and painted his high-energy delivery as unrefined, with the early 2000s industry consensus branding him a flash in the pan who would vanish the moment his youthful charm faded. But Tyrese possessed a relentless hunger and a sharp instinct for the global audience. He leaned directly into the very roles critics mocked, transforming his character Roman Pierce into the comedic soul of the Fast and Furious franchise. While reviewers sneered at the ridiculousness of the scripts, Tyrese was laughing all the way to the bank as those films began grossing over $1 billion each. He understood that modern stardom meant being part of an ensemble that connected with people in every corner of the globe. He didn't need the prestige critics. He needed the loyalty of the fans, and he earned it. Beyond the screen, he has parlayed his once-mocked status into a career as a best-selling author and entrepreneur, and his Fast films have collectively grossed over $7 billion worldwide. Despite the occasional memes and public drama that swirl around him, his professional longevity is simply undeniable. At every turn, Tyrese proved that the pretty boy had more than enough muscle, physical and mental, to outlast his harshest critics, staying on screen until the credits rolled on every last doubter. Nick Cannon. Nick Cannon is a name that sparks endless debate, but behind the tabloid headlines and the corny jokes lies one of the most brilliant business minds in entertainment. When he first burst onto the scene as a teenager on Nickelodeon, comedy purists immediately dismissed him, mocking his clean, high-energy style as saccharine and childish, and insisting he lacked the grit for a real Hollywood career. Even when his early film Drumline became a surprise hit, grossing over $56 million, critics refused him credit, branding him a one-hit wonder playing a version of his teenage self. For years, the industry's favorite pastime was mocking his outfits, his laugh, and his seemingly forced enthusiasm as a host. But Nick was playing a far longer game than his critics realized. He didn't just want to act, he wanted to own. He leaned into the corny label, using it to build a brand accessible to families worldwide. And while the cool critics sneered, he was busy producing Wild 'N Out, a cultural phenomenon and a primary incubator for new comedic talent for nearly 2 decades. He understood that being likable was the key to landing the biggest hosting contracts in television, eventually commanding a salary near $4.5 million a season at his peak. Today, Nick Cannon is a media mogul with an estimated net worth around $50 million, having hosted, produced, and developed content across every major network. He proved that you can be the butt of the joke and the boss of the boardroom at the very same time, that the mockery of his sincerity was actually the fuel behind an extraordinary work ethic, and that staying corny can be the smartest move in the room. Brandy Norwood. Brandy Norwood is celebrated as one of the most influential voices in contemporary music, but her work as an actress was long dismissed as a pop star's vanity project. When Moesha premiered in 1996, critics were quick to mock the idea of a teenage singer carrying a sitcom, ridiculing her wholesome image, calling her acting stiff, and suggesting she was merely reading lines between recording sessions. The mockery intensified when she reached for mature material. Reviewers of the 1998 slasher, I Still Know What You Did Last Summer, were particularly biting, insisting she was out of her element. For years, the industry's favorite narrative was that Brandy was trapped in a perpetual state of goody two-shoes innocence, lacking the grit for serious dramatic work. But Brandy used that skepticism as a catalyst. In 1997, she made history as the first black woman to play Cinderella, in a television movie that drew a staggering 60 million viewers and shattered racial barriers in fantasy casting. And while critics mocked her as too pop, she was quietly honing her craft on Broadway, earning rave reviews as Roxy Hart in Chicago, and proving her artistry translated flawlessly from the recording studio to the stage. Today, Brandy is recognized as a pioneer who paved the way for a generation of multi-hyphenate stars, and with an estimated net worth around $12 million, she has moved into mature roles like her acclaimed work in Queens. She has proven that the mockery of her innocence was really just a misunderstanding of her longevity. She didn't fade away like so many of her peers. She evolved, reminding every viewer that you don't have to be edgy to be enduring. You just have to be excellent. Jaden Smith. Jaden Smith has spent his entire life under a microscopic lens, facing a level of public mockery that would have crushed most young performers. As the son of Will and Jada Pinkett Smith, he was the prime target for nepotism jokes before he'd even hit puberty. The ridicule reached a fever pitch with the 2013 sci-fi film After Earth, when critics savaged his performance as wooden and robotic, some calling the movie a publicity stunt for a child who couldn't act. The internet turned him into a perpetual meme, mocking his philosophical social media posts and fashion as the pretentious ramblings of a privileged Hollywood kid. But Jaden responded with a radical kind of self-awareness. Rather than fight the mockery, he simply stepped outside the entire system that created it. He moved away from the blockbuster path his father had paved and leaned into independent film and avant-garde music. And his nuanced performance in the Netflix series The Get Down revealed an artistic depth his critics had ignored, proving he was far more than just Will Smith's son. He turned the pretentious label into a brand, becoming a fashion icon for a generation that values environmental activism. Today, Jaden is an entrepreneur with an estimated net worth near $8 million, and his Just Water company, focused on sustainable packaging, has been valued at over $100 million, proof that his weird ideas carried real-world value. Having survived a decade as the internet's favorite punching bag, he emerged as a respected voice in art and sustainability. He proved the mockery of his privilege was really a fear of his individuality, and that the best way to handle being a meme is to become a movement. From being the butt of the joke to becoming the bosses of the boardroom, these 20 stars proved that in Hollywood, the best revenge is massive, undeniable success. Every scowl, every corny label, every nepotism jab became the very fuel that built an empire. But here's the question worth arguing over. Does the industry's brutal mockery actually forge these legends, or is it a toxic barrier that almost robbed us of their genius? Should stars like Jaden Smith or Tiffany Haddish have to endure years of public ridicule just to earn a seat at the table? Drop your honest take in the comments, and let's debate it. And subscribe to Secret Celebrity Stories, where every punchline hides a comeback.